InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the SKNIS Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards. Welcome to InFocus, a weekly program where we zoom in on what's happening within and throughout the government, your government. As a result of climate change, St. Kitts and Nevis continues to experience prolonged dry periods that has negatively impacted the supply of water. In the area of electricity generation, the tremendous cost of fossil fuel seems likely to continue rising, as ABC News recently reported a spike in oil prices on October 10th as a result of the Israel-Hamas war. How is the government here in St. Kitts and Nevis responding to these factors? The Honourable Congress Maynard, Minister responsible for public infrastructure, utilities, roads, post et al., is here to provide insight. He will also highlight efforts to digitally transform the local postal sector. Stay with us as we delve into your government, your business.
Because of the post office, you can reach almost anywhere on the globe. And so it's an important institution which we have to celebrate.
Thanks for staying with us for this edition of InFocus. And now, allow me to introduce and welcome the Minister responsible for public infrastructure, energy, utilities, etc., Minister Honourable Congress Maynard. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Ian. It is my pleasure to be here.
And actually, it would be your second time. I remember you joined when we had the VNR report. But
yes.
This is the first time that you're solo here.
Yes, indeed. And unfortunately, at that time, because of government work, of course, I was involved in a meeting that I couldn't be here sooner. But now we're here, good to go, ready to go.
Absolutely. And so there's so much to get into. And
yes.
I want to jump right in. So, of course, on October 9th, which would have been on Monday, St. Kitts and Nevis joined with the rest of the world in celebrating World Post Day. What is the current state of the local postal sector?
Right. So I think a word to use is transition. Because traditionally, the Postal Service has been around for quite some time, over 100 years. And this was the way in which the world communicated. This is how you would get a message from St. Kitts and Nevis to Australia or any part of the world. It had to go by some form of post. But as you know, with the advent of technology and digitization, now you can send that same document or a message via your personal device like a phone or an email. And so the postal sector has to adapt to these changes. And so we are in that transitionary phase or that transitionary period where persons are not using posts as much for traditional communications. And so we have to remain relevant. Although it still provides a very critical component of our economies. Because of the extent and the vastness of the postal network globally, you have an incredible established structural network to get things across the world, whatever it may be. And so you have to utilize that to your advantage. Also, you have to utilize the fact that post offices exist in almost every place. Even in remote areas. In St. Kitts, we have multiple locations for post services. And so we have to look to see how do we transition to allow for additional services, non-traditional post services to be available in those locations. So we are at a point now locally where we're in transition. So we're in transition to modernize and to digitize and to stay relevant to our growing economy.
So what would some of those non-traditional services that you just touched on look like?
Right. So for instance, at our general post office, you can pay your water bill. So when you think of things like that, financial services, for instance, that post offices can offer, such that you don't have to come to the establishment, but there is a portal at a post office that allows you to do that. In terms of transitioning as well, for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, everything is done manually. Right, and I think later on we could speak some more of this, but we are about to introduce the counter automation system that is going to vastly improve the efficiency of how we do business in the post office. And finally, I think we'll also speak on this a little later, is the national addressing system, where no longer, as I've kept mentioning, that Ian lives down the road by the mango tree after you pass the breadfruit tree, with the old car on the outside and the yellow fence. It is going to be Ian Richards, number 3, SKNIS Drive, Buckley's, Bastia. And so the postal service will become much more efficient, and then it can have that particular skill set or that particular information to provide to technological advancements such as Google Maps and so on, so that you can put in your address and find it. So the post office has to do those things to stay relevant.
Okay. Now the theme for World Post Day is Together for Trust, Collaborating for a Safe and Connected Future. Can you break that down for us and put it in a local context so that persons listening can understand?
Right. So firstly, obviously, because of the wide network of postal services, it is a trusted enterprise or infrastructure. People send sensitive things through the post office. So we have to remain together because the people trust us. But we now have to collaborate for a safe and connected future. As I mentioned before it was just paper, but we now need to digitally connect. So apart from just providing services for a letter or traditional post, as I mentioned, now we can be connected by other services, whether, as I mentioned, financial services, paying your bills, and these types of non-traditional services, as we mentioned, that can keep us connected. And what about inviting other sectors to be a part and to collaborate with the postal services? There are other courier services that exist. How can we foster relationships and partnerships with them to offset the challenges that postal services are having with the cost of sending mail different parts of the world? How can we collaborate with private sector, for instance, other private institutions, to make it more efficient and more cost effective for our customers?
And I know one of the things that was a hit, you could say, with the public in terms of introducing new services was the introduction of the U.S. mail postbox. Now, of course, that was several years ago, and you were not in government at that time. But certainly it speaks to one of the things that you mentioned in terms of the innovation, offering different experiences that persons can go to the post office, as opposed to, going to the private sector. Of course, now the intention was not to compete with the private sector, but generally to expand services.
Right. So that's one of the areas that showed the transition as well, and transformation, and the expansion of the postal services, and that exists today. But yes, you are competing in a space, so you have to make sure that you at least match the services such that people have the options available for them. Obviously, the post office will never be in the business to get anybody else out of business, but to make sure that we provide additional options for that. So there is going to be additional work on that in terms of improving its efficiency, because, again, the network exists, the trust exists, and so we need to build on that.
And it's important to note, just for persons who may not be aware of, that the postal system, the confidentiality of it, it's protected by law.
Yes. Absolutely.
And that's around the world.
Correct. And that is talking about the trust that has been developed over centuries, over a century, that this mail is sacred. From the bank to you is supposed to be sacred. And as you said, that is protected, and also part of the policy governing the union, the Universal Postal Union, on how we are to interact with mail or items to be posted.
Right. Okay, Minister, let's move to the digitization aspect. As you mentioned earlier, counter automation software. Tell us a bit about that software and what it's designed to do.
Right. So if you go to the post office now, you would realize that the process there is almost as old as postal services itself, where everything is still done manually. Everything is written up, receipts, books, tally at the end of the day, add in, and so on. What the counter automation system seeks to do is to eliminate all of that analog or what we call old time accounting, to digitize it such that it is more efficient, more accurate, and saves time and improves accuracy. So now the interaction will not be just writing down things manually. It will be just like if you go to another business. You buy something, it's in the system, it takes it from the stock that's there. So at the end of the day, if you sold 100 stamps, your stock now has been reduced by 100 stamps, you can count off and so on, and the customer can get the necessary receipt. You can keep information, customer information. So if there are regular customers that come in all the time, you will have a customer database. So it's automation of the postal services that you get. So that is going to be very critical. We are in the process of upgrading our network system there to be able to facilitate this, so that it can work as efficiently as possible. So that's part of the digitization.
And how will that essentially impact operations at the post office?
Right, so it's going to make it a lot more efficient. It's going to save time in terms of counting up, working out how much stamps. For instance, maybe you want 797 stamps, $95 of stamps. It will tell you, okay, give X amount of this, X amount of that, and so on. So it's going to increase the efficiency and reduce the amount of time that a customer would spend. It will also increase the operational efficiency of the post office, because now it will eliminate the human error factor that is always there when you have to add things by hand. It's going to increase accountability, because for instance, any clerk who is entering the information will have a set of information. They're responsible for the stamps that they have. The system is going to say you sold X amount, you collected this amount of money, that it must be there. So it's going to increase accountability, and it's going to allow us to track and observe behavior in a digital way, how much stamps we sell at a particular time, how many of a particular type of stamp we sell. So we're going to be able to do all of that type of analysis when we have an automation system.
And from the customer side of it, of course, I have had experiences where I would go to the post office looking for a package, and they would have to look through the book, and it would be the US mail system, and they look through a book, oh, we're not sure we see it here, let me check the system, which to my mind, well, if the system was as updated, right, and automated, that is just a simple click of a button and you'll be able to find it.
So we are now moving towards that, in keeping with the government's thrust, and of course my own ministry's thrust in ICT. ICT has now actually been paired with Post. It's the same ministry now, that we are moving forward with our digital transformation in every aspect of the government. So we're taking those incremental steps such that we can eliminate a lot of this manual work that engulfs our system.
And it also will help with the supply side of it, and especially when it comes to stamps. So if you know that there's this particular stock of stamps that are there and they are running low, then you would know, okay, the system would indicate, let me notify the supplier, we need to restock.
Absolutely. So you can manage your inventory. You're less likely to run out of a type of stamp, because it's now automated, and if you have 100 $5 stamps and usually you use 5 a week, you'll be able to say or to know when we need to put in an order for $5 stamps.
Right. Now, Minister, you mentioned in your address for World Post Day that the St. Kitts Post Office is, no, sorry, I just referred to that, but in terms of your World Post Day message, you mentioned that, the collaboration is important. And that leads us to a meeting that you mentioned, that you went to, and you mentioned earlier, the UPU, which is the Universal Postal Union.
Right.
That meeting was in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Right. So we journeyed to Saudi Arabia last week to attend what is the 4th Extraordinary Congress of the UPU. Now, it's an extraordinary Congress, so they have their Congress, and then you have extraordinary Congresses when you want to deal with certain matters coming up before the other Congress. And so we journeyed there to participate as one of the members of the UPU. So St. Kitts and Nevis was obviously well represented. We had the permanent secretary, and we also had the assistant, the deputy postmaster general in attendance. So a number of issues were dealt with. There's a plethora of them, but there are some critical ones which I guess we can speak about. And it was important to be there, especially as a Caribbean country, because one of the things that these congresses point out is how much strength we actually have as Caribbean nations. In this vote to change any policy with respect to the Universal Postal Union, the USA is one vote. UK is one vote. These countries are one vote, just like St. Kitts and Nevis is one vote. But the Caribbean are multiple votes. And so when we work together, we are able to collaborate and lobby for things, or to vote for or vote against things that may affect us. And I guess we'll talk about some of those critical ones. Should I go on?
Well, before you do, let me mention, as you spoke about the fact of one country having one vote, that speaks to the value of the representation. The fact is that you are at the table.
Absolutely.
In order to make that vote.
Absolutely. And we take that for granted sometimes because running a government, we do not run a government in isolation. We have to be present on the global stage. And when there are global decisions being made, if we're not there, then we're going to be out of the loop. I have seen this now in a number of cases where if you are not present, if your voice is not heard, I think the Prime Minister likes to say, if you're not on the table, then you're probably on the menu. And if you're not there to collaborate and to let your voice be heard, for instance, it takes just one person in these congresses, just to give an idea of how they work, because there's so many people. This had maybe 130 countries present. If there's an issue that is being discussed, and there is a question as to whether there is support, when there is no dissent, meaning when nobody says anything, it goes through. Mm-hmm. But it takes one person to say, I have a problem with this, to force it to go to a vote or to find some compromise. So there were many instances where there were issues that were put on the table. There was not consensus. Usually you want consensus where everybody agrees, nobody objects, and takes one person. Now, if there was an issue that affected St. Kitts and Nevis particularly and you're not there, then that issue will go through. And so there were some issues that we saw the importance of the Caribbean and other developing nations, because it's not just the Caribbean, you have some other small island developing states around the globe, together prevented some things that might have happened at that Congress.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about some of the things that you mentioned now. Let's go into details and some of the important factors and how they relate to St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right, so I think one of the more important, well, let me start with the, some of the critical ones, including decisions of how the operators are to fashion themselves to take advantage of the digital trends and how they will adapt their operations to keep up to date. So that was important. We supported, for instance, or rather there was a vote on a number of things. For instance, opening up the UPU for other players to be involved. You know, the UPU consists of postal services, but there are other courier services that could be involved. So the discussion has now been opened up. So this Congress decided it's time for us to have a discussion on opening up the UPU for membership and for partnership with other private sector players. We also, this year was a year to determine fees, on how much fees are paid to the UPU for it to do its work and to do its regulatory work. Those fees were increased. There was general support that it was time to increase by a certain amount. So St. Kitts and Nevis will have to pay a little bit more. But in the grand scheme of things, we are charged based on our size. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. So it matches our economic push. But another important vote we had was the climate discussion that we're going to have to make sure that all our operations are in line with a greener future. And so those are things that, you know, garnered support. One of the things that that was critical is this notion of freedom of transit. Now, in the postal sector, freedom of transit basically means that if I send a package from St. Kitts to France, on its way, everybody who touches it must not do anything to inhibit it reaching where it needs to reach, because that is the spirit of the connection of postal. So freedom of transit. But there was a particular suggestion by some in the European Union, I believe, to put some restrictions on the transit of our mail. If that succeeded, it could very well mean that avenues for us to get to other countries will be blocked. And so we will not be able to use their postal services to transit mail to our final destination. Fortunately, again, we met as a Caribbean and said that at this point, the way this is fashioned, this does not suit our purpose at the moment. And so we lobbied the necessary persons, the US and others, that this will effectively kill small developing states if such a thing would go through in its current form. And so that was preserved and it failed. So you see the importance of being at a conference such as this, a congress such as this, to ensure that everything is done in a spirit of maintaining the spirit and ethos, the original ethos of the postal sector.
Mm-hmm. Right, and as you speak, Minister, about packages or mail getting to where they need to go, it brings us back to the national address system that you referred to earlier. Mm-hmm. Tell us how that will work essentially.
Right, so at present, right now, we don't have official addresses. Sometimes people even make up their own address. So they take, for instance, their lot number for their house is number 3, and they live in Buckley's Extension, and they say, I'm not number 3, Buckley's Extension, or I live Bay Road. Mm-hmm. But if you look at that address, you could never find it on a map. And so what we're going to do now, and what we're in the process of doing, is creating a national addressing system that is similar to what we see in developed countries such as the United States or Canada, where although these places have millions of addresses, they take maybe 2 lines to identify an address. A number for a building, the street that the building is on, the city, the state, a code, a zip code of some sort, or a postal code of some sort, and the country. So we're going to have postal codes, dedicated postal codes. The template that we have is going to resemble this. KN, which will indicate that it is St. Kitts and Nevis. Mm-hmm. Then the next number, if I'm not mistaken, 1, will indicate whether it is St. Kitts or whether it is Nevis. So 1 will be for St. Kitts, 2 will be for Nevis. Then our parishes, previously, many years ago, were given some numbers. Bastia, I think, is St. George's is 70 and 71, and so on. So from the number 70 to the number 84, we have 14 parishes in St. Kitts and Nevis. So there are 15 numbers because St. George is split into two. So between 70 and 84 will identify your parish. So as I said, for St. George's, it would have been KN1, which indicates it's in St. Kitts. The next two numbers, say 70, indicates it's in St. George. And then St. George is further broken down into two parts, maybe 1 or 2. So that when it comes in and to the post office, that's a sorting code, KN1701, that box. I don't need to figure out anything. That's the code. I don't need to read. I don't need to understand what it is. That is the code. That is the area it is going. So that particular postman or post service, that's where that going, immediate sorting. So we'll have a postal code. What we'll have as well is street names. It's going to be very, very critical. So the post office is presently working on a draft policy on how we are going to go about naming all of the unnamed streets in St. Kitts and Nevis. Well, in this case, in the first instance in St. Kitts, everyone will have an opportunity to have an input. The process we are looking at is providing draft names for streets based on history, based on postman and postwomen experiences, based on our culture. We'll propose some names. So let's say you live on a blank street now, and maybe you had a colleague who used to sell tam and jam, and he was the best, and the area wants to recognize him, and his name is we got Taman Man or something. Let us say we suggested that it should be named Richard Street. But the community says, no, I think we ought to get Taman Man. There's going to be a structure in place that you can lobby the support of persons on that street to have the name as to what it is. But the important point is that you're going to have to get consensus. So one person won't be able to get up and say, well, it should be named this. No, you're going to get consensus. So we're going to name all the streets in St. Kitts and Nevis. And then we have to have a number for each property. So let us say you have that same Taman Man street, and you have 20 properties on that street. Each property will get a unique number. So it may be 1. So Ian might live on 1 Taman Man street. Then that's the street address. The next address is usually the city in the United States. For us, it's going to be, I think they're going to call it the community, right? Because everywhere doesn't qualify to be called a city.
Right.
And so, for instance, you may have the housing development called Buckley's Development. Taman Man Street might be in Buckley's Development. So you will have Taman Street, which is the street address. The community, which is called Buckley's Development, and the last one is called, which would represent the state, but we're not calling it a state because we don't have a state. I'll get the last name of that, but that will then be the general area. So that might be Bastille. So it will be 1 Taman Man Street, Buckley's Housing Development, Bastille, and then your zip code. Or what we call your postal code. So it will now limit and be very specific. So every address in St. Kitts and Nevis will have a unique identifier. And so we're working on that now. We hope that we can get this process completed throughout the rest of this year and launch that very, very, very soon. I'm very excited about this because this is going to be very critical in a whole host of other things. For instance, address confirmations. Now, an address confirmation when we do our digital transformation agenda, when you go to the bank now and you have your digital ID will be pinned to that address that we have identified, maybe as a primary address or a secondary address. So the bank doesn't have to now ask you to go and get an address confirmation because you will have a digital ID, which we are working on, that will be pegged to your address, which has now been confirmed as a legitimate address. Right, so it's all intertwined. So I'm looking forward to getting this part done, because we are in the process of doing our digital ID. We hope that the launch will happen, probably early 2025, because it is an extensive process of development. If we could get it earlier, we could get it earlier. But this is going to be such a critical part, the national addressing system.
Public education would certainly be very important in that respect, because there are some persons who may feel, well, it's so much to remember now, it may be more complicated.
Right. It's actually going to be a lot easier to remember, because amazing as it is, an address, for instance, in the United States, everybody always remembers their address. They only have one number to remember, their zip code or their postal code. So if you see a postal code once, KN1702, you'll remember that, right?
And that also will help, of course, with the electoral registration.
Yes.
Very important as well.
Yes, absolutely. So it is a very, very critical exercise.
Okay, Minister, as we established at the top, of course, you are also responsible for utilities.
Yes.
And there have been some challenges in terms of the electricity generation. We want to touch on that, but we'll take a quick break first.
Okay.
In Focus, we'll be right back. Welcome back to InFocus. We continue our discussion with the Minister responsible for utilities. We'll use it at this point in time, et al., the Honorable Congress Maynard. Minister, let's continue to talk now about electricity. We move to that topic. There's been some challenges as of late. Update us there.
Right. So in general, as I've mentioned before, the SKNIS is in a position where there needs to be major investment. They presently use systems that are very old, 20-something, 30-something years, and that is what we are depending on right now. Recently, for instance, one of our older generators, while the generator itself was okay, there was an issue with either a fuel line or some line to the generator that had an issue. Now, because of the situation where we do not have excess capacity at the power station, if a fault is developed to a big generator and it has to be taken offline, then there can be particular outages associated with that. I want to take this opportunity, though, to give strong commendation to the team and the staff at SKNIS, because they do extraordinary work. I can tell you that since coming in government and being involved with a number of different areas, SKNIS really has tremendous amount of expertise, and they know what they are doing. They just need to be supported with the resources to do their work, and we are presently doing that. We are putting the things in place. We are making the investments. But as anything, development of these things do take time. The securing of finance and so on does take a bit of time, but we are doing it. And so what has happened recently is this year we got back online a 6-megawatt generator. Because of these shortages, and as we rebuild and reinvest to improve our capacity, there was a decision that we will move to rental power as we do this transition, because at the time, because of the market, it was actually very difficult even to get a small generator. We could not, and so it was easier to go to rental. Fortunately, however, when we were able to improve capacity by bringing back on the 6-megawatt generator, it gave us a little space, a little time, and we were able to change those rental the rental proposal into getting 2 smaller generators. So one we received 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the other I think we're going to receive next week. So that's going to improve our capacity by another 3 megawatts. However, these are not the type of generators, as I've mentioned before. These are not the type of generators that are built to just be running consistently like that. And so we now have a number of them. By having more, you're now going to be able to stagger their use. And what happened again recently is because some other generators were down, because remember, previous to now, those generators could not be taken offline for their regular maintenance. And so the wear and tear on them was extraordinary. So once we got that little space where we could actually take a generator off the service, that is when the other generator, the line to the other generator, developed a fault. And so while some generators that were out for maintenance being maintained, the other generator had to be taken offline. However, there has been obviously an improvement. It was never going to be a long-term situation with that, because that issue was resolved and the maintenance continues. Plus, we're getting a new generator. It should ship tomorrow and should be on our shores next week. And that will complete our 3 megawatt improvement over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So that is the actual situation with SKNIS. Added to that, of course, with the immense heat that we have. With the immense heat, people are using a lot more energy for the purposes of AC. So we were at very close to our limit as to how much capacity we have and how much we could generate. And so any little maintenance that needs to be done would affect the ability to power all of the country at one time. That is why our investments in renewables are so very, very critical, and our investment to improve the fixed capacity stock at our power station.
And as it relates to the generators, of course, these are complicated machines. It's not a simple fix as whereby something is off for maintenance and another generator that is online develops the fault. And you can say, oh, shoot, let me go and just close a panel here and put it back in service. Right. It doesn't work like that.
Absolutely does not work like that. When dealing especially with large loads like these, you have to remember the absolute danger that our workers at SKNIS are putting themselves too. So it is not an easy thing. These are huge systems that are running 24 hours a day sometimes, in most cases. And to take them offline and to open them up take a lot of time. And so I don't think, and maybe we need to do a bit more, I don't think people understand the scale of how much the team is doing with what they have right now. Yes, better days are coming. We're making the investments, units will be coming, but in the meantime, they're doing an excellent job to try and maximize the use of what they have.
Energy Month is coming up, certainly an opportunity to get a greater insight from the SKNIS generation of electricity power plant aspect of it, right? So, Minister, let's move now also to the independence reset, because of course, as you referred to the cost of these generators, SKNIS essentially has to raise money through the collection of its payments of the bills. And so the independence reset allowed an opportunity for persons who were disconnected to be reconnected. And you could say, okay, that was an additional strain on the generators, but it is something that the government, of course, felt was absolutely necessary. How has the public responded to this reset? Right,
so it's very important to understand that the government felt that for 40, we are coming of age, we are becoming a man or a woman, we are maturing, and everybody must have a chance to get going again. We had challenges, of course, with COVID-19, and so it was felt by the government that let us look at some areas where people are hurting. And we had identified a number of them and said, let's provide a reset. So the reset is basically persons who may have struggled some time ago. The policy, of course, at SKNIS, at any utility, whether it is your phone, cable, water, or electricity, is if time has passed and you are using the utility and you're not paying for it, then obviously you will not stay connected. So there were some persons who were not connected. So what this reset allowed is for those persons to go into SKNIS and say, look, the government says, as the sole shareholder, please reconnect me and I will set up with you on how I will deal with the arrears that I have. But don't hold those arrears against me by not reconnecting me. So the government put a policy in place where anyone who was disconnected can go in and get immediately reconnected once they presented themselves to SKNIS and arrange to have what we call a deferred payment plan. How that works really is, let's say you had an outstanding bill of $5,000 or $10,000, whatever the case may be, that was built up over some time. What SKNIS will do is reconnect you, and you will work out with them the money that is owed. Choose a term over how long maybe you think you can repay that, and you pay a little bit of that over time along with the current that you're presently using. So this is a very important time to stress that we have to conserve our energy as well. We take it for granted. We leave things plugged in, your chargers, lights, televisions running, monitors running, all of these things take power. I know some people who are very, very good with conserving energy, and their bills don't go, they have very low bills, but they're enjoying a perfectly fine life because they are energy conscious. We need to reach to that stage, especially if you're in a situation where you have to deal with some arrears that were there before. Manage the use of the electricity. And
so there is, of course, the need for renewables, as we discussed earlier. And of course, the government is moving towards solar energy. It used to be Governor Antoine was here last week, and he referred to it as the low-hanging fruit. It's the most obvious thing that should be tackled first. But one of the challenges that he mentioned that is affecting the development of, or should I say, the greater rollout of solar energy across the region would be a feed-in tariff.
Right.
And for the benefit, well, perhaps I'll ask you to explain to our audience, for those who may have missed the program last week, what a feed-in tariff is, very quickly, because we're a bit pressed for time, and also how the government is looking to implement a feed-in tariff so that persons who make that investment in solar energy can benefit from the investment.
Right. So one, we are presently completing or developing the feed-in tariff policy. So that is in train. What a feed-in tariff is if you produce renewable energy and you feed it back into the grid, you get a credit, or there's a cost that is paid to you technically for that energy produced. So let us say you have a 10 megawatt system and you put that into the grid. There is a tariff, let's say 1 cent, I'm just calling a thing, a figure that you get for putting that into the grid. Then there is a tariff that you pay to SKNIS for taking from the grid. And then when you offset them, the balance is what is due to the electric company. So the feed-in tariff is to deal with how we're going to account for power that is put in the grid, into the grid. So what the governor was probably referring to is right now the ECCB does have a solar system, and they might be putting power into the grid, but because the policy is not yet developed, they can't get any benefit financially or credit-wise for that energy that they are putting into the grid. But I just wanted to report that that is in train, and we should have a draft policy ready very, very shortly.
Can we expect to see solar panels on houses that the government is building?
Right, so that is an intent of the government to ensure, and has been for some time a mandate of the government since, maybe 10, maybe even more than that, because there's an actual policy in place regarding solar equipment for some time now, where there are no duties and particular taxes on them. So yes, that is definitely a requirement that the government is looking for, or rather a policy that the government is looking towards, that new developments will have solar power. But that same feed-in tariff policy will govern exactly how these solar panels and solar systems interact with our grid. Because very quickly, it's not just sufficient to tell everyone go and put solar panels on the grid. Because, for instance, the same issue with the generation at the power station, if you put all of these solar panels on the grid, you're actually reducing the need for power at the power station. If they turn down their generators, right? But then all of a sudden there's a big overcast of clouds. Power is now not into the system. It will destabilize the grid. if SKNIS is not able to power back up their generators in time. So it's a technical thing where you have to make sure that all the balances and all of the nuances are accounted for.
Right. Minister, we refer to the Israeli-Hamas war, which, of course, as mentioned earlier, the prices of oil is already spiking.
Yeah.
What's the government's response? How do they plan to address this?
We have to push forward on our renewable energy policy. We just have to keep going. We're in talks now to finalize a number of projects. We just have to push because we have zero, absolutely zero control of the price of oil. Zero. So we have to push forward towards energy independence, that is with our renewable sources, solar energy, and also the support of the geothermal project in Nevis.
But the government continues to subsidize electricity.
Yes. So, and obviously the response for the government is to continue to do that, to subsidize, because right now no customer is getting the impact of the fluctuating prices in fuel. The government is absorbing that. But obviously that will not be sustainable. We are spending millions and millions of dollars in subsidy to residential customers. So your price or your rate of electricity has been fixed, at least over the last 12 months for sure. So even if the price of fuel goes up, your electricity price has remained the same. If you look on your bill, you will see the FVC charge listed and you will see it taken away. The government is paying that. And it could be as much as 10, 20, 30%, 40% of your bill that the government is paying. So the only solution to not having to do that is to move to renewable sources. Right.
And of course, Minister, we established also that you're responsible for water. And so we want to discuss water. So we're going to take a quick break, Minister. It's our final break. We promise our viewers and our listeners. So our final break. We'll be right back with more in Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome back to InFocus. We continue our discussion with the Honorable Conress Maynard, the Minister responsible for public infrastructure, utilities, and in this case, what we're going to discuss next, water. Minister, update us on where the country stands in terms of its water supply.
Right. So one, we are completely affected by climate change. We have only 60% roughly of the water this year, rainfall this year, 69% roughly that of the water we got this year compared to what we had last year. We had 60% this year for what we normally would get by this time over the past 10
Just to
years.
put it into context, if you have a glass that persons normally would drink from, fill it 69%, which you may not be able to figure out correctly, but I should know it's a bit more than half.
Yes.
That's
correct.
what you're talking about.
Absolutely. So if I have a glass and you go down to just above 50%, that is how much water we're getting this year than we were last year. However, our consumption still remains as though the glass was full. So it means that we do not have enough water to spread around. And so that is the dire situation we're in. Thankfully, though, this government oncoming in was very, very strong on the need for us to turn around our water situation. So one, we initiated the services of BEAD, and we have found water in the Keyon region. We have found what could possibly turn out to be the biggest water well in St. Kitts that could produce maybe 700 to 1 million gallons of water in a day. That is a big, big feat. Right now, all that is right now, what is being done is the necessary things to develop the well such that we can pump the water out on a regular basis. We also made a decision to invest in a desal plant. So very shortly we will be signing the agreement to develop a 2 million gallon desal plant in the Basti area. That should be sorted very, very quickly, and we will announce to the nation. So in a short span of time, we are going to have an additional 3 million gallons per day of water going into our system. Also, we are developing, or we are seeking to find any additional wells that exist in St. Kitts, such that we can drill them, use them if we have to, or cap them. So we have totally changed our stance on water. We are being aggressive about it. Again, it takes time, because although we got water, I think, in August, it now takes a few months to actually develop that well. So it's going to take a bit of time, but we are doing what we need to do. So I want to empathize with anyone who are having or who is having water challenges. It is something that, there's very little we can do immediately, outside of course, conservation. Because if we all make a commitment to conserve, use 20% less, cut your bath by 20%, running water that we use by 20%, we could have an impact such that we could provide water for more people. But we are working to improve the source of water for our federation.
Can you explain just briefly, Minister, in terms of extracting the water from the well in Kayon? Because there are some persons who felt that the minute that there was an announcement that the well was found, that the water would be running the next day or the next week, perhaps even the next month. But it's not as simple as that.
Correct. So the first thing was to, they had to do the analysis first to identify the location. They identified the location and they drilled down to see what was there. When they found the water, so they've put in a major a casing, they have to determine if it's potable. You can't order the equipment for the well unless you know the water is potable.
Which is basically good to drink.
Good to drink.
Right.
Once you establish that it's potable, you also have to determine how much water is coming out of the well. So a test has to be done to see how much water is coming out of the well. That will then guide you on what type of pump you need to buy, what size casings and so on you need to do. So those things have to be procured. It's not something you can pick up in TDC or Hosfords and just do. So once you make those determinations, it will then take a few months now to get the pump has to now be manufactured according to the characteristics of that well.
Because they don't just have them sitting there in stock.
Correct. Because you don't know what it would be. Because a pump that pulls water from 500 feet below the ground is different from a pump that pulls 300 feet. It's different from a pump that pulls 100,000 gallons to a pump that pulls 500,000 gallons. So once those characteristics are known, then you have to put in your order for a pump. And we certainly don't make pumps here. The casing has to be built, the housing has to be built. And so generally we say it takes about 6 months to get going. And since we started around July, August, you can gauge there. We're hoping to get it done a little sooner. But that is why you can't drill and get water the next day. Or, well, you can, but you're not going to have the right specs. You put something down there, you start pulling up, you're going to burn out your motor because you might only be pulling out 100,000 and you need to supply 500,000. So in order to do it properly, the relevant tests have to be done to then spec how you're going to build out the well.
And the desalination plant that you referred to earlier, and for those who may not be aware, desalination is essentially taking seawater and transforming it into fresh water. So yes. Whatever process they use. Now, the plant that you referred to earlier, is that the one that was promised by the UAE, or is that the one that the government is investing in terms of building? Right.
So we have the one that's promised by the UAE. That is going to be at least 30,000 gallons a day. It can be more. That is ongoing. So the contractors for that are presently involved in putting that in place. That is going to be at Canada Industrial Site in that area, and there's going to be one in Nevis as well. The federal government has also made a determination that it will invest in a 2 million gallon per day desal plant, the first one for the government. Of course, there is a desal plant in St. Kitts that has been operating for the last 20 years over at Royal Utilities that has a capacity of 1 million gallons.
And that's at Marriott?
Yes. And so we have persons on the ground who are absolutely familiar with doing that. And in fact, the person who won the bid to build the plant also was part of building the one at Marriott. So we are very confident in their expertise, and we're just at the final stages now of setting up that agreement and get going with the construction of the desal plant, dealing with all of the land issues, all of those technical issues that we're doing now. So the government is investing in a 2 million gallon desalination plant, which I hope by next summer will be good to go.
And the power for those things are incredible. I attended a energy conference that they had here at Marriott. So how does the government intend to solve that issue in terms of power in the plants?
Good. So that's another very important observation. So for this, we are also in partnership with providing solar power specifically for that plant, and in discussion with the developer to have solar power as one of the alternatives. Obviously, we have to make sure that our capacity on the grid can take that. So SKNIS is also working to ensure that these other units that we are maintaining and doing the maintenance, etc., will ensure that we have this space once this comes online. Because one of the challenges, well, the major challenge with desal water is just energy. If you have unlimited energy, then you can have unlimited water because of the source that we have. When we go to places like Riyadh, or where I was in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East, etc., it's almost strictly desal water because they have no rain. They get maybe 0 inches of rain a year. So they have to use energy to create water. So that is what we have to resort to now, because our traditional sources are being dried up. We're getting 40% less rain. Our wells are being depleted. We are on the brink of damaging our wells, especially in the Bastia region. So we have to pull back. We have to go to desal.
I don't think the public will forgive me, sir, if I have you here without asking about roads.
Oh yes, roads. We all know that that's a big issue. So as you would know, we're doing a number of road developments around rehabilitation and new roads. Recently, the St. Peter's main road, which is in very bad shape, that has gone to the procurement board, and the winner will be announced shortly. If it hasn't been, I'm not sure if it is. So that project will get going very, very shortly. So all of the development, all of the design, everything is now finished. The road is now ready to build. Around the country, we're doing a resurfacing campaign in certain areas. You will see it in Limekeel, in Sadler's, in St. Peter's, Greenlands, Wigley Avenue. We're doing our resurfacing campaign. But additionally, we're going to be dealing with a number of our dirt roads in some of the areas all across the country. So we're going to be putting concrete roads. I know, for instance, the Shadwell West, Shadwell South area. That's going to be the next project. I'm sure they had the site visit already. The tender is already out, so people are bidding for that. We're also going to have roads done in the Boydsview area, in Palmetto Point, in Far Meadows, in Rollins, in St. Paul's, Racecourse, in Newton Ground, Lodge, White House in the St. Peter's area, Stapleton, Gundo. So we are on now a path to do road developments. I am thankful to the Ministry of Finance and the Prime Minister himself for ensuring that we've got an additional $30 million to do concrete roads around the country. So we're rolling that out right now. So there's going to be roads. Takes a lot of money. 30 million only scratches the surface to do, and so we have to do them in phases. So in some of these areas, we can only do phase. Some we'll do in full, some we have to do in phases as we're able to allocate more money for road development.
So you expect the St. Peter's Road to begin before the end of the year?
It should begin before the end of the year.
And I was glad to see that the road was patched.
Yes.
So the asphalt plant is back up and running?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I haven't been able to drive up to see if it was patched, but before I traveled,
I can tell you,
I said, make sure that this road is patched, because although we have although we are finished with the procurement process, it still takes a while to mobilize, and we don't want to wait until we are mobilized. So I'm glad to hear that the patching continues.
Right. Minister, we're out of time for this program. We would like to invite you back sometime, because one of the things that you refer to, the fact that you are the Minister of ICT.
Yes.
Of course, you are traveling soon enough to participate in ICT Week, which I know is something that is big. And then there's also a conference on AI coming up, and we had a very fascinating discussion with Psyche Southwell about AI, and I would certainly love to get your thoughts on how the government is looking towards AI.
Right.
Also, we have to mention the robotics team is overseas right now. They are in Singapore. And so all of these things are certainly things that are interesting to the public, and we certainly would like to see how government will continue to support and develop in those areas. So we would like to have you back sometime.
No problem, anytime.
Right. And so thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us for this edition of InFocus. Be sure to join us next week at the same place at the same time. For now, I'm Ian Richards.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the SKNIS Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.